Ding dong 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 dong. Sorry, I don't know what the heck happened there. Anyways, glitch in the Matrix stories. Grab a blanket, turn off your lights for true scary stories that happened in the glitch.
Childhood experience. There was a post about a disappearing home that made me think of this childhood experience. Sorry about formatting, typing this on my phone. Okay, this takes place between the ages of 6 to 8, when I used to live in a very small northern Ontario town. So I have a sister who's a year younger than me, a brother 8 years older, and a newborn sister at this time. Me and my sister, close in age, always hung out together, and with the same neighborhood friends. We didn't have different friends always together, but for some reason, there was one place I liked to just go on my own. It was this forest, about a block away from my house at the end of a dead-end street. In the middle of the forest was a big clearing with an abandoned farm-type house. On the other side of the clearing there was more forest, and at the end of that highway that led into the town, pretty busy highway. I'd always bike over to this forest, and like clockwork, these two kids would be there. Brother and sister, I assumed, both blonde. The brother a bit older than the sister and I. For some reason, these kids were only my friends. I wanted it that way. We would always bike out to the clearing and stand at a distance and watch this abandoned house. As a kid, I would have been more than ready to explore that house, but I never remember going in or even that close to it, just watching it. The kids would always eventually disappear out the other side of the forest, saying they had to go back to their house on the other side of the highway. I was always confused by this because I didn't know any kids who were even allowed close to that highway, yet they seemingly crossed it to get home. Oh, and there were no visible homes on that side that I knew of. So one day, I go out there and the kids aren't there. I figured I just missed them. I keep checking and never do see them again. So I go out in the forest one day by myself, get to the clearing, and the old house is gone. I was pretty scared and nervous, so I got out of there. I remember asking my brother and sister if they knew of the house, if they had seen it. They both said they had been in that forest many times, and there never was a house in that clearing. I asked if they had seen the blonde kids, and they had no idea who they were. I stayed looking out for these kids until we eventually moved to a new city later that year. I still don't really know how to explain this house and these kids, but it's confused me my entire life. The place that didn't exist. I came across this subreddit a while ago and thought this would be a good place to share something odd that happened to me 2 years ago on summer vacation. This is my first post, please be kind. It was summer of 2011, and my younger sister and I were on our way to a family friend's house to pick up a wheelchair for my mother, who had recently been disabled due to a car crash. Anyways, this friend, let's call her Jen, lived about an hour away in a very backwater area in South Carolina. My sister, 14 at the time, and I left around 6 p.m. in my shabby old car. We drove along the long stretches of Southern Highway until we reached the lakeside subdivision where Jen lived. We turned into the subdivision and wound our way down towards the bottom along sloping, overgrown lakeside roads. The road was bordered on all sides by mobile homes perched precariously on small lakeside properties, so many that it was always hard to tell where one yard ended and the next one began. It's important to note that my sister and I had been to this location more than 5 times in the past 2 years. It was for various holidays with Jen's family and our own, so we knew the area well. We got to the bottom of the first hill, where Jen's double-wide trailer should have been, and instead, we saw a vacant space being mowed by an overweight man we didn't recognize. His sweaty face was grinning at us in an unsettling way. The subdivision was arranged in a large circle, and we knew that if we turned right, we could loop all the way around and come back to where we started. It would take about 10 minutes to get all the way around the subdivision to the entrance again. We were convinced that, somehow, we had driven past Jen's house and thought it would be the best idea to look for the house again. We started to turn right and continued up the circle. This is when things got weird. Instead of staying relatively flat like it normally was, the road started to climb in a steep, sloping way. My sister remarked at how odd it was. I kept driving. The slope became more and more extreme. We would reach the top of the hills that were scarily high, and then they would slow back down into deep gullies. It had been about 20 minutes of solid driving since we entered the subdivision, and we could not spot houses to the left or the right of the road, only thick forest on each side. My sister said she was scared, and I was too, though I didn't want to admit it. I was the older sister, and I knew that if I showed any fear, she would become very frightened, so I tried to play it cool. I did, until at one point, we got to the top of a hill that was so high, I had to use all my strength to hold the brakes as we went down the other side of the slope. It had now been 30 minutes since we entered the subdivision. Seeing no other cars on the road, I put our car in park and stopped for a minute. We rolled down the windows of the car. Since the summertime heat was becoming so extreme, we felt like we could not breathe even with the air conditioning on. At that point, in the stillness, we realized we could not hear birdsong. There was not a breath of wind in the air, and a feeling of dread passed over the two of us. The only sound was the two of us breathing and the quiet humming of the car engine. I tried calling Jen to see if we had taken a wrong turn, but neither of us had any mobile phone signal. We decided immediately we had to turn around. Something felt so incredibly wrong. It almost felt like our very lives were in danger. I made a U-turn and we headed back the opposite direction. We went up the large slope, and instead of experiencing the roller coaster-like hills and slopes on our way back, it was a straight road. Within 5 minutes, we could see houses again. Families played out in the yards. Within 7 minutes, we came back to the start of the subdivision, and sure enough, there was Jen's house. I felt the blood drain out of my face. We quickly went inside, picked up the wheelchair for my mother, and left immediately. Last summer, we went back out of curiosity one slow summer day, and went straight around the small subdivision in 10 minutes without experiencing anything out of the norm. We laughed it off and continued with our day. Even now, 3 years later, my sister and I still talk about the summer of 2011, when we went to a place that didn't exist. A town in Mississippi that doesn't exist. You may notice that the story was posted before. For some reason, it was removed, and the moderators don't know why, so they told me to just repost it. Just wanted to let everyone know the situation. I was driving my grandmother home from Nebraska. I think we were traveling south on Highway 45. Everything was normal. We were just cruising along. There were no side roads, and no gradual splits. We're just driving straight down Highway 45. All of a sudden, we found ourselves in this small little town. The road didn't veer off and no turns were made. All of a sudden, we started noticing strange things. Wide open hilly land turned instantly to thick woods that you couldn't see through. The trees started getting closer and closer to the highway until they were almost brushing the driver's side mirror. The thick wooded area started giving way to buildings. Looking around, my grandma and I found ourselves in a little town. It was just a main street that led to the end of the town. which held a strange, large gray and black church or town hall type building. There are very few cars, and the cars that were there were odd. One of them I remembered. It looked like a mix between 50s and 80s construction. The town itself was just so strange. The second we pulled into this little town, my grandma starts getting extremely uneasy. I knew something was up. The town was just wrong. It's hard to describe. At first glance, it looked like any other small town. It's when you start examining things more closely that the wrongness of this place became apparent. The resulting effect was just creepy beyond words. I think it's called the uncanny valley. When something looks a little too lifelike, but not lifelike enough, and you're left with just a very creepy sensation. This is how it felt. That is how this impersonation of a town left us feeling. It's hard to describe the strangeness of this place. Okay, imagine that somebody took a very skilled artist who had never seen what a small town in America looks like. The artist is given a detailed and highly stylized description of a small town, Main Street, USA. He then paints an extremely detailed portrait of what he believes a small town in America looks like. The resulting painting would be very odd at best, or downright terrifying at worst. That's the best way I can describe this town. A deceptively realistic representation of a small town. A strange place designed off somewhat flawed information, with no first-hand knowledge to aid in the detail of this painting. The end result is a place that looks normal, but upon closer inspection, is the stuff of nightmares. Everything about the place just seemed off, especially when you take into account the fact that we never made any turns. One moment, we were heading south down Highway 45. The next, the forest on either side of us thickens to the point where you couldn't see anything through it. The forest growing so close to the highway that you could reach out your window and touch them. The forest then thins out and opens up. Out of absolutely nowhere, a little town pops up. We're slowly down into the small, little Main Street town. At this point, I'm thinking, wow, this is really strange. My grandma, on the other hand, is already in the "we should be anywhere else on this planet except for right here" stage. I don't see any people at all there. In hindsight, that's probably a good thing. The big building at the end of the street, the building that looked like it was the most important building in the town. It had gray walls, a black roof, with, I think, 4 towers, maybe more. If the town looks somewhat ominous, then that building looks downright diabolical. I was becoming very apprehensive the more I thought about our situation. I knew something extremely strange was happening at the time. Highway 45 doesn't just dead end into a town that's not on any maps. Like I said, there were no gradual turnoffs, and we definitely did not make any turns ourselves. Getting back to the way that place looked, it was like a dream. At first glance, if you were just driving by, everything might appear to be normal. You stop to look for a moment, and you see so many irregularities. Windows in wrong places, storefronts with no doors and no signs. There were no other streets turning in or out. It looked like just a description of a small town. It was missing so many details. On the way into it, the woods got immensely thick. The trees were growing all the way up to the highway. There were no shoulder. A tree could have taken my mirror just by getting close to the edge. Sorry, I know I mentioned the forest before. It was just so strange. Tension was growing inside the car. About halfway to the building at the end of the street, I had slowed the car down to a crawl. My grandma in the seat next to me was absolutely freaking out at this point. To her credit, she was doing it in a relatively silent way, just terrified and shaking, saying, we need to leave. I guess I'm very lucky that my grandma was with me. If I'd been alone in that place, curiosity would have gone the better of me, and I would have definitely got out to explore the place. I felt like we were in a place that we were not supposed to be in, a place that we were not supposed to know about, that human eyes were not meant to see. It was like this mask was put over whatever was really there, just in case any uninvited guest decided to show up. All they would see was that strange small town. I don't know how we ended up there. a place where people aren't supposed to be. If I'm right, then what we saw was just masking something else. Then how terrifying would the truth have been? So thank you, Grandma. You probably saved my life. Because I would have absolutely had to explore that place. I did a 2-point turn. If you know what that is, it's when you pull close to the right side of the road. You put your car in reverse, then turn your wheel all the way to the left. You hit the gas, and your car spins around backwards. You hit the brakes right before you go off the road on the other side. Drop it into drive, turn your wheel back to the right, and hit the gas. 2 points. Reverse, then forward. We start driving back up the street that we come down. And I honestly didn't even know that this would work. I had no idea how the nature of this place worked. I was half afraid that we would be stuck there. But soon, the strange, odd-looking buildings gave way to the thick forest. The forest that was almost touching the highway. After driving through this for a while, the trees started clearing out a bit. We drove until the highway went back to normal again, with the trees far off of the highway, and the forest not so unbelievably dense. I continued driving north until I saw a sign that said I was going north on Highway 45. I made a U-turn and headed back towards south down Highway 45 again. All the way there were no turnoffs, there were no merge lanes, and there were no slight turns that I might have mistaken for the main highway. Once again driving south on Highway 45 again, nothing else weird happened, besides not seeing any turnoffs at all, and never coming across any unnervingly dense woods. Grandma at that point. Grandma was shaking. She and I both knew something out of this world had just happened. I don't know what town we ended up in. I do know there was no such town in Mississippi. I checked. So, this was one of my bigger glitch stories. I would absolutely love to know if anything like this has happened to anyone else out there. And once again, thank you, Grandma. Edit. I have a kind of theory for why some of these glitches happen. The theory is the world is built up around us. Each of us have our own set parameters. We are free to move out and about in this world, though. There aren't any real restrictions built in. There aren't any impassable walls. But the parameters of our lives are still there. If you do something completely spontaneous, the world around you, the life built specifically for you, has trouble keeping up with your sporadic movements. It's at these times when you are most likely to come in contact with the extraordinary. I believe the bigger the deviation from your normal life, the greater the wondrous events have a chance to be. That's just my theory based on my observations of these events. I don't have any real evidence, especially hard evidence to back it up. It's something I've noticed with multiple people, not just myself. Missing and added trails. So I thought I posted this one already, but I guess not. This all happened last summer. The first one happened on a trail that I go on all the time. I am an avid hiker, and I go on this trail a couple times a month in the summer every year, so I know it like the back of my hand. It's a 3-mile long hike to a beautiful mountain lake. Right towards the end of the trail, there's an intersection on the left that's easy to miss if one's not careful, that leads an additional 3 miles to the lake. If you miss it and stay on the main trail, it goes somewhere else. So, I was hiking and knowing that I was getting close, and when I was on the switchbacks where the slope of the mountain was on my left, I was keeping a close lookout. But then I saw the trail to the lake on my right. That was weird enough, but even weirder was that there were 2 well-marked and well-trodden parallel trails to the lake. One had never been there before. One said 0.3 miles to the lake, and the other said 0.5 miles to the lake. I was shocked. There had never been 2 trails before. My kids were also surprised, wondering where the other trail had come from. We took the 0.5 one just to see, and it didn't look like a new trail. It was wide and well used, with no tree stumps or signs of clear trees or anything like that. Besides, why would they make a useless parallel trail anyways? Both trails met up right before the lake. We took the other one back, and it was just as I remembered it. Ever since then, there have been 2 trails on the right instead of 1 on the left. The other glitch is more spooky. I will never go there again. I live in the woods, and there is a 4-wheeling trail that I often hiked or 4-wheeled on. At the end of it is a narrower but well-used walking trail that I would go on sometimes. Once in the early winter, I parked the 4-wheeler and walked in further than I had before. I looped in a very clear trail around the lip of a small canyon covered in scrub oak, and to the other side, where there was aspen, and then across a beautiful wooden bridge in a dense evergreen forest. The new-looking bridge and well-trodden path indicated that this was a well-used and maintained trail, but I didn't see another soul for the few hours that I walked. After crossing the bridge, I started getting an eerie feeling, like I was being watched despite the beautiful surroundings. I decided to turn around. In the spring, I went back again with my kids to show them the bridge and the beautiful forest. The problem is that after we pulled off in the usual clearing and overlook, where we had always stopped the 4-wheeler, and where the walking trail begins, there was no trail. There were a few faint trails, but they looked like deer paths. Not the well-marked path I'd been on. I kept going back and forth looking for it. It had been so easy to find before, but just headed straight after the 4-wheeling trail ended. We ended up taking the biggest deer path, thinking that the trail must have gone overgrown. But I don't know how a wide, clear trail could become that overgrown during the winter in a few months. Especially since I live in a high desert, so restored trail takes years to start growing stuff on them, right? The trail also seemed to have less trees and was more open as it looped around the canyon. We walked for over 2 hours, and there were no signs of the river and the trail. The trail itself was getting more faint, yet I could see we were headed in the right direction. We got to some aspens finally, but half of them were dead. It wasn't like I remembered it. Also, the trail turned into some scrub oak, which only it wasn't a trail, but just tramped down scrub oak bushes. Okay, so there was no way bushes and trees could have sprouted up on the trail in a few months. I also started to see a lot of larger scrub oak trees that were bent in half but not broken. A person wouldn't be able to do that, maybe wind, but I usually just see wind break or uproot trees, not bend them in half in the middle. Also, who had stomped down all the thick bushes making this weird trail? I started to feel very uneasy and had a very strong feeling of being watched and not welcome back. So I took my kids and hightailed it out of there, and we've never been back. So the trail, bridge, river, and all of that is gone, replaced by some creepy, desolate, seemingly animal trail. I want to go back once more just to see if it's back. But I'm scared.